Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here. Thanks for tuning in to another installment of my complete analysis of all 389 Bach chorale harmonizations. Today we're going to be looking at Freu dich sehr, o meine Seele, which roughly translates to Rejoice greatly, O my soul. You might notice that I have a new friend with me today. The thumbnail might look different in comparison to the last several, and that's because I am very sad to say that Anna Magdalena has been chewed by my dog. Somehow she got knocked off of my desk during my cleaning today, and he got to her. I'm very sad. This was a handmade gift from a friend of mine, and it was my dog doesn't know any better, and I didn't punish him or anything. I just am very disappointed that she got knocked off my desk during my dusting. But I'm gonna try and repair her. I have some of the pieces off to the side here. But she's not in any state to be on camera for long periods of time, so I'm gonna take her off. As you can tell, giraffes are my favorite. I have another giraffe here. It's a little, this giraffe is not named yet. She's a little big for the camera, but she's hanging out. She's doing her thing. That being said, interesting chorale today. Not so much for the harmonic reasons. Again, we have another one of those weird cadences towards the end of the piece where we cadence on 4, but also because this chorale harmonization is titled Freu dich sehr, o meine Seele, which is not the melody that's used in this chorale. There's actually another melody that's used from this exact same, or it's not even necessarily that this chorale is not labeled the way that it should be in the volume. So what I'm going to have to do in the future is I'm going to have to vet the chorales as they're titled in the volume that I'm using, just to see whether or not the title lines up with the melody that's being used, because this melody has nothing to do with the melody based on my resource that I've been using to source the BWV numbers. I was not able to find this melody in the cantatas that have this name, so kind of fascinating in that regard. I don't do too much deep diving, but it just so happens that when I was looking for the BWV number, I couldn't find this melody by this name. This melody is actually 1 in 3/4 time, and it has nothing to do with this this shape. It's actually another one entirely, and but regardless, it's a pretty straightforward chorale. 1 sharp in the key signature, start on G major and non-G major. We're in the key of G major, and we start on a G major chord, like I said. We then have F sharp, A, D, and A. That's a D major triad in first inversion, so a 5/6, and then we immediately go back to a G major triad in root position. So we have 1, 5, 6, 1, pretty normal progression so far. And again, we have another 5 chord, but this time in root position, D, F sharp, D, and A. And then we have E, G, D, and G. I think this D is an accented non-chord tone here, and this is actually a C sharp diminished triad. That's the way it sounds like to me, so that would be 7, 6, a 5, as C sharp is the leading tone to D, and D is the 5 of G major. We then have F sharp, A, D, and F sharp, which would be a 5/6 chord, which is what we're used to, which is what we would expect afterwards anyways. If you analyze the C sharp as a non-chord tone here, this would just be a 6/7 chord in root position, which I guess really they're accomplishing the same thing as a predominant chord. A, C sharp, and E, the passing 7th on the bass. That is a 5 of 5. A major, which is the dominant of D, which is the dominant of G. And then we have D, F sharp, A, and D. 5. It's a half cadence in the key of G major. I don't think a modulation has occurred. It just doesn't sound like the chord is modulated or the key has changed. It sounds like G is still very much the tonic here, and that's really what my guiding, that's what I'm being guided by. Then we have E, B, E, and G. Let's say root position E minor triad or 6 chord. F sharp, A, D, and A. It's another D major triad in first inversion. G, G, D, and B. Another 1 chord in root position. Notice 5-6 has always gone to some sort of 1. Actually, bold-faced lie, it goes to 5-5 here, but this is a different context. When we're staying in the key and not getting ready for a half cadence, it's going to 1, passing 7th of the bass. Then we have A, E, A, and C. It's a root position 2 chord. Or if you're looking at this F sharp as the tone that's being attributed to the chord, and this E is an accented non-chord tone, that would be a 7-6, which goes to B, G, D, and B. It's a 1-6 chord, and usually 7-6 goes to 1, so I don't know, I guess it ultimately, they're accomplishing the same thing. Passing tone in the bass, then we have a D, G, D, and A. I think this G is a 4-3 suspension over the D. This is actually just a 5 chord. Root position. This F sharp is the note that's being part of the chord. And then we have G, B, D, and G. Root position. G major triad. Perfect authentic cadence. Alright, next section we have, again, another G major triad, but the bass leaps up an octave and the voices rotate. Bach does this a lot. E, E, G, and C, our first 4 chord, this time in first inversion. D, A, F sharp, and D. It's a D major triad, 5 chord. E, E, G, and C. Another C major triad over E with a passing tone in the bass. G, D, G, and B. Root position 1 chord here. G major triad. And then we have D, D, F sharp, and A, again with the 4-3 suspension going on. It's a 5 chord in root position. And then we have another 1 chord in root position here. All that really changes is the bass, otherwise all the notes are the same. So this is an imperfect authentic cadence actually, as we do not have a G in the soprano, which makes this an authentic cadence, but not perfect. Okay, we have an interesting progression here actually. We have G, B, G, and D. This is not really the interesting part. Actually, it's more interesting than usual. This F natural is indicating to me that this is not a 1 chord, but rather 5-4, which is hard to tell if you're just looking at the triad, because it requires a 7th to contextualize whether or not it's serving a dominant function or a tonic function. But this F is telling me that it's serving a dominant function. It's not part of the chord, but it's part of the phrase, part of the chord group, I guess. Then we have E, B, G, and D. That is a 6-7 chord, or I guess D, B, G, and D, or D, let's see, D, B, G, and D. I think this E is an accented non-chord tone. This is actually D, B, G, and D, and then this same chord is now 6-4, as opposed to root position. There are a couple of different ways to look at this. If this D is the passing tone, and then we have E, D, G, and D, or E, B, G, and D, that would be a 6-7 chord. But because this is I'm calling this E the chord tone, or this E the accented non-chord tone, this D would turn it into a 5-6-4. And it's okay because it's part of a passing tone figure. And then we have C, C, G, and E. That is a 4 chord in root position, as we would expect. Passing tone in the bass. And then we have D, A, F sharp, and D. That is a 5 chord. We've seen this 4-3 suspension over the D chord quite commonly in this progression, or in this chorale so far. We've seen it a couple of times. Then we have E, G, E, and C. Another 4 chord right here. But this time it's in first inversion. Passing tones in the lower voices. G, B, D, and B. That is a 1 chord in root position. Passing tones in the tenor and the inner voices. And then we get 5. Another half cadence. And again, I don't think we've modulated. If I didn't know any better, I might be listening for D minor here with F natural and C sharp. But no, we don't have any D. We don't have any B flats. That being said, we don't even really need B flat, but it doesn't quite sound like it's modulated. This just sounds like it's very brief. Just like the C sharp, it's very brief. We don't really get a cadence on anything that would indicate a modulation anyways, so that's usually my tell, is that if it sounds like it modulates, it's modulated. Otherwise, you could argue that there is a modulation if there's other context, but other than that, it's usually just use your ear. G, D, G, and B, one chord. Passing tone in the tenor, G, same thing, but the bass leaps down an octave. There's some voice exchange going on. Sort of this weird, actually we have like a 8-7 sort of suspension going on, so this is more of like a passing tone than a suspension. A, C, E, and C. Depending on how you look at it, this might be a 2 chord in root position, or it might be a 7-6. Depends on how you look at it, but I'm going to call it 2. Be consistent with the other phrase that we saw that used the same thing. B, D, G, and B. It's a root or first inversion G major triad. Passing tones in the upper voices. And then we have C, E, E, and G. It's a root position 4 chord. Root position 4 chord, passing tone in the bass, passing tone in the tenor, so the lower voices. A, C, F sharp, and A. That is a F sharp diminished triad in first inversion, so 4 wanting to go to 6 here, especially in root position. And then we have G, D, G, and B. It's a root position 1 chord, 4-6-1, or 4-7-1 rather. Passing tone, chord tone, and we cadence on C. So again, we have this really weird cadence where we go from 1 to 4. It's like a half cadence, but not, because we're not cadencing on 5, we're cadencing on 4. And this is a very Bach thing to do. We've seen this in several of the chorales in the past, but usually the way that I've analyzed it is this. If we're looking at this in the key of C major, we have 1, 7, 6 of 5, 5, 1. But what sort of undermines that is the presence of F sharp. If this was an F natural, I would be compelled to say that we've modulated, but we just go from 1 to 4. He cadences from 1 to 4. Sometimes they seem more like a modulation than not, but with this chord progression, I'm not necessarily convinced that we have modulated. And then in fact, this is just purely a cadence on 4. So if you look at it like a modulation, it might be an imperfect authentic cadence. Otherwise, it's, who knows, it could be like a half cadence maybe, if you call a half cadence 1 going to a chord other than 1, or a chord other than, so it's like tonic to something else. Who knows? I haven't been able to find any documentation on it, so if you have a resource, you let me know in the comment section. Then we have G, D, G, and B. Again, we have a 1 chord, root position, passing tone in the soprano, F sharp, D, A, and D. It's a D major triad over F sharp, or 5-6 chord. We then have E, G, G, and C. That is a first inversion C major triad, or 4-6. Passing tones in the lower voices. Again, kind of we see this figure where the tenor gets a long line and the alto gets the latter 2, and the bass gets the first 2 to pair up, but the tenor gets an active line the whole time. G, B, D, and B. That's a root position G major triad. Passing tones in the inner voices, like I just said. C, D, F sharp, and A. That is a D7 chord over C, or 5-4-2. And we usually expect that to go to 1-6. Let's see if that goes where we expect it to. B, D, G, and B. It sure does. Never fails. Passing tone in the bass. D, D, G, and A. This is just a 5 chord. Remember this G, don't be tripped up by this G, it's just a 4-3 suspension over the bass. And then we have a passing 7th in the tenor, and then we have cadence, perfect authentic cadence on 1. So other than this, I should put a parenthesis on this side because that C kind of looks like a parenthesis as well. Yeah, this cadence right here is really interesting. I don't fully understand why. I don't fully understand how I should go about analyzing it. It could be an imperfect authentic cadence in C. It does not sound like the piece is modulated. It just sounds like he's cadencing on C, and I don't know what to call that. I've looked for it. I've Googled it. I've looked through my textbooks. I have 2 harmony textbooks. I have tonal harmony, and I also have harmony, which are 2. I grew up with the textbook just called Harmony by Walter Piston. That's the one that I borrowed a ton from my local library. And then tonal harmony is the textbook that they used at my alma mater. So I have a copy of that textbook, and none of them talk about a cadence of 1 to 4. So to me, it sounds kind of like a half cadence, but weaker. It's like not an inverted, because that already has a definition in music, but a flipped plagal cadence, where the roles are reversed. But 1 going to 4 has this effect of the dominant going to the tonic in its own way, because 1 is the dominant of 4, which is interesting. If it's of major quality and in major keys, that doesn't have the same effect as if it were to have occurred in a minor key, 1 going to 4, or 1 major going to 4. That being said, interesting chorale. Again, seeing this theme of cadencing on 4. It's interesting. I'm going to try and get Anna Magdalena repaired. She's become, like a mascot for the channel. If not, I have other giraffes and other stuffed animals that I could put in the side of the frame and make it a little bit more interesting to look at, rather than just my mouse pad and a folder, and the analysis, of course. But it's a nice little thing to occupy the frame. That being said, thanks for watching the video, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the analysis, and I look forward to tomorrow's. Take care.